Welcome to another edition of Spotlighting Paradise. I'm your host, Henry White. My guest today is Kalowin, author of Talking About Race, a workbook about white people fostering racial equality in their lives. It's a very powerful, explosive book, and we're going to delve into the book in just a few, but I want to welcome you, Kalowin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, how are you?
Terrific.
Good,
Terrific.
good. So glad we're able to connect and do this.
It's wonderful.
We got a lot to talk about.
Yes.
So I'm just going to get right into it.
Great.
Why don't we just talk a little bit, why don't you tell the folks out there a little bit about yourself and
Okay, great.
your background?
I'm originally born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, where I raised my 2 adult children, and moved to Northampton in about 1991.
Okay.
And I've been a singer. I've been involved in politics, human resources, almost everything you can imagine I've done.
Right.
So also very involved in child care and child development, and went to Holyoke Community College and then also transferred over to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And that's where I got inspired to write this book.
Okay.
Yes.
And before we go into that,
Yes.
because that and the inspiration for the book and how you came to write the book is extremely important. But I want to go back a little bit to your Brooklyn days.
Okay, great.
We talked a few days ago, actually.
We did,
and you
yeah.
have a rich history in Brooklyn, and there was some dynamics there that actually sort of catapulted to some degree or a lot to you writing the book. But talk about your days in Brooklyn, and I actually learned that your ex was a really good friend of mine. We just learned this through conversation.
Yes, we did, yeah.
Very awesome gentleman who actually I interviewed here a few years ago. He was one of my first shows here. A well-known artist who passed away, God bless him, George. But why don't we talk a little bit about your Brooklyn days?
Sure. I went to Catholic schools throughout grade school and high school, and I also went to a play group called Adele's, where you went out and you got trophies for your sports, how well advanced you were in your sports. And then I met George Williams, and we connected very deeply right away, and then we married soon after and had 2 adult children, to have 2 children. And we experienced a great deal of racism in the community.
Because you're as an interracial couple.
Exactly,
right, okay.
exactly.
Right.
And so I began to pay a lot of attention to it, and rather than responding right away to it necessarily in each incident, I would kind of just observe it and keep it in mind, and then eventually started writing about it. In fact, one of my first poems is called Welcome, and it says, "Welcome to the world of the good intentioned, ties once severed no longer undone.
Wow.
So you step into the stuff of which life is made. Long before your souls embraced my womb, you opened doors, you marched inside. The roar of familial struggles, the turbulence of inherited responsibilities. Welcome to the world of the good intentioned." And I wrote that when my children were 2 and 4 years old. So I had begun to really record it and start to really assimilate what we had undergone, understanding that that would not be okay with me.
Right.
And but I still worked very actively in social services and in politics, and as a singer I performed and as a writer.
Right, so you have a
I did
rich
a lot.
background, community activism.
Exactly, yes. Yes.
So how did you get to, you went to Mount Holyoke
I went to
College?
I went to Holyoke Community College,
Holyoke
not Mount
Community
Holyoke,
College.
yes. And then I happened to transfer over to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and completed getting my bachelor's degree there.
Okay, and what was it?
Well, I had come from New York. My family is interracial. And I was surprised in 1995 at the racism, the segregation on campus, how gradually everybody really stayed within their own ethnic group, and how antisocial the environment was in college. And then you go into a class and you take a class on classism or diversity, and then you would leave the class and no one would be speaking to each other. And
that's interesting because most people, especially outside of you would think that even to this day that conversations around racism, racial equality, and that sort of thing, the subject matter at hand, is usually done, I wouldn't say comfortably, but at least more consistently in an academic setting. But you're saying that really wasn't the case.
I think
per
so,
se.
but I think it was very difficult for people to open up. And I'll get more specific. It was difficult for white people to open up, and it was difficult for students of color to acknowledge that white people weren't opening up. I mean, we all know what we experience with one another, and then you don't want to be in a position where you're kind of like telling on.
Right. So there wasn't a lot of work.
It wasn't spontaneous.
Right. It wasn't right.
There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of anger and a lot
Which
of guilt.
always comes along with the conversation around racial.
It does.
and
It does.
racism and-
It does. It's a
right.
very emotional process. Many people react to it rather than responding to it, which is why I wanted to draw attention to it and give over some more vocabulary for it so that it becomes a little more easy to talk about.
Right.
With political correctness, a lot of things are simply forbidden
Right.
and have been forbidden, and it's not going to help. It's not helping. So, but of course you need a certain environment that's conducive toward it. You need a
Absolutely.
safety net. You need some kind of guidelines as to how to conduct conversations about racism, or how you might like to foster racial equality in your life,
Right.
and what to do.
Absolutely.
A lot of people haven't a clue. They don't know what to do or how to
Right.
do it. So it's
So-
yeah.
Yeah. So and with that, you wrote and came up with a workbook.
I did.
And I have to say, you just used a couple of words that I would say personally, just from reading it, is emotional. And I think I used the word powerful earlier because I think it's an extremely powerful book. And I want to ask you, well, first, let me just read a review, just a real short one from, it says, a compelling mix of first-rate analysis, personal stories, and practical, illuminating exercises that help readers push forward in the struggle against racism. And that's from Tim Wise, the
Yeah.
author of White Like Me, which is
Yes.
huge. So why write the book?
I think racism is extremely painful. As a white person, when I began to really understand the magnitude of it and how much it seemed to permeate almost everything, everywhere I went, and how much deception is involved in it, it's not acceptable to me. So it pained me too much to continue to live with it without addressing it. And without coming out with some kind of a solution for it. So this is one treatment, one solution
Right.
for it. I also believe strongly, having gone through the process of being a student in college, one reason why I left college years ago, because I went to a Catholic girls' school in New Jersey. And I left it within a year because the racism was just horrible. It was unbelievable. And I refused to continue at 18 and 19 to be in an environment that fostered racism instead of fostering racial equality.
Right.
So I had decided, there are many other students like myself who really were at odds with it. You worry about your ideals. You wonder how your life can reflect your ideals. And if you get too much opposition to what that is that you want for yourself, you will make other concessions along the way, unless you have certain skills and tools already, unless you have a conscious application of your ideals to match this particular subject.
Absolutely.
Because everywhere you go, it exists everywhere you go.
That is true. And a lot of people have their own definitions of what racism is, racial equality, so on and
Yes.
so forth. And I know in your book
They do.
you actually have the students write, or you challenge folks to talk about or write about their own definition of
Yes.
racism. And you actually have
Yes.
your own definition of racism. And if you don't mind, I'd ask you to
I will.
let
I'm
the
gonna-
folks out here know what
Okay.
your definition of
Great,
racism
great.
is.
I'll read it. Racism is a systemic, psychological, and economic approach to life imposed upon the psyche of individuals from infancy onward. Its origins were created out of the myth that white people are superior to people of color. Through slavery and enforced labor, it has survived and will continue to survive as long as white privilege remains intact. It can be unlearned just as it has been learned. Racism relies upon ignorance in order to remain effective. It cannot bear to give up power. It loves money, fears poverty, and despises sobriety. Racism thrives on all addictions, and yet it loathes attachment. It is at once deeply personal, while it is wholly incapable of intimacy.
Wow. I'm sure we all can relate to your definition at some point, or at some level of where you're coming from. I think what stuck out for me, and if you don't mind, just it says it cannot, or it fears poverty and despises sobriety. What do you mean by that?
In my experience, well, capitalism has a great deal of racism in it, of course. That can be discussed in many, many ways, more thoroughly than I would get into it now, of course, and we can do now. So it has a great deal to do with wealth, and also sobriety has always been a problem with the history of racism in our culture, and it continues to be. I think that people are really so fearful, and I think there's a difference between addictive behavior and less dysfunctional behaviors in intimacy and in relationships, and so that's somewhat what I meant by that.
Okay.
Racism is a part of us. Let me put it this way: we're born into it. We inherit it. All of us.
It's part of the fabric of this country.
Precisely.
Just like drinking and other, unfortunately, but.
It is a part of our lives. It's something that we need to make decisions about, and there's no hiding from it. We won't be able to hide from it. It's not going anywhere. And it's not going to go anywhere unless it's more challenged, discussed more often, and unless there are some kind of safe environments in which it can be discussed, where people feel relatively safe discussing it and ridding themselves of this inheritance.
That's right. And speaking of feeling safe, I think it's quote unquote safe to say that talking about this subject matter and race and racism is not it's not an easy conversation to have.
Right.
I'm reminded of a quote that I heard before, that in order for people to really delve in and really move this conversation forward, they really have to, people have to come outside their own comfort zone. And there has to be a great deal of uncomfortability to really get to the heart of what racism and racial equality is about.
Yes, and I totally agree. I think that there's a lot of guilt that we've already absorbed in our lives because of it, especially if we've not been able to take it apart and analyze it and make decisions that have to do with it. You can be confused about your complicity. You can be confused about your right to have your own identity apart from it. That happens to all of us. All of us want our own identities apart from racism. Absolutely. How do we get there? How do we do it? How do we navigate our way through that with any degree of comfort? How do we get rid of shame or guilt? How do we get rid of anger? How do we stop hating one another because we've been informed through so many other sources of who we are supposed to be to one another? What about stereotypes? What about a common prejudice? How does that all of a sudden accumulate into some outrageous neglect or disregard for any aspect of humanity? How does that happen?
Right.
Well, it happens through comic books, it happens through technology, it happens through television, it happens through entertainment, through magazines, when you're completely inundated with that. Unless, one of the reasons why I wrote my book was because I had this relationship to George and his family. And I figured, well, not everybody's going to have access to integration, number one.
Right.
And number two, it shouldn't have to take one intimate relationship in order to understand and free yourself of your own, cultural biases and hatred. And we're not even talking about protecting oneself. That's even another aspect.
That's a whole other aspect, exactly.
So, because it's violent, because racism is violence. So there are so many ways in which together, united together, we can sort these issues out. We can identify what our deeper concerns are, and also repair and restore ourselves apart from this legacy of racism. We can leave it aside. We can't free ourselves of it.
Absolutely. Now, you didn't just write this book, but you also, it's a workbook.
Yes.
So people have to, and you target it specifically to white folks. I mean, it's a great book for anyone to read, obviously, but your target population was white people. What has Well, first of all, and I think you answered a little bit of this earlier, but I would think some white folks might say, what qualifies you, Kaylin, to write and
That's right.
challenge me as a white person?
Right. And what does qualify me is that I am white.
Simple.
That's it.
Okay.
Here I am. I'm white.
Right, okay.
No matter what I do,
Right.
I'm white. I'll be white for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And that's exactly what qualifies me to do it. The other side of it is that I've explored all this so thoroughly, you know, and not a day wakes up when I don't have to think about racism, period. In my book, I say, if you had woken up this morning and there was no racism, how would that have changed your life today?
That's a very good
Today.
question. Absolutely.
Anyone can answer that question.
That's right. That's right. So what has been, and I'm sure you have some way of sort of gauging the response from white people in general, just people in general, to your book?
Sure, sure. I think there's been a lot of interest and curiosity about it. It's been somewhat supported, I think, on a fundamentally superficial level by many. I have also, though, many, many fans. I hear from people every day about it. Certain colleges are now considering having it be part of their diversity curriculum.
That's great.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it's in all the indie bookstores. It's in Amazon. It's sold everywhere. It's also in many, many libraries.
Right.
And so I think it's all right. Speaking engagements have been coming in, and
can imagine. Yeah.
it's been. But there is a kind of reticence. There is a hesitation. And my book holds you accountable. It says you're born into this dilemma. What do you think of it? What do you want for yourself? Is this what you want? If not, how are you going to do? What are you going to be doing about that? Today. We're not talking about tomorrow. Today. How can whatever you've been doing be changed so that you're reflecting what you say you are, who you think you are? And you do identify what racism is in the book. And you also get a chance to define what you believe racism is in the book and also tell your own race story, because we all have one. We all have a race story.
Absolutely.
We all had that moment, whether we were 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 or 15. For many white people, they're 30 and 40 when they go, oh my God, oh my God, I didn't know. Well, that's okay. There's still time. There's still time to acknowledge it. There's still time to deal with it. There's still time to make a change.
Absolutely.
Within
That's what I
yourself,
was
within your
gonna
life
say.
about it. Precisely.
Absolutely.
Precisely.
Yeah, we can always still make a change.
Yes.
Let me read a paragraph from your book here, and this is one of the ones that stood out for me. It's from the title, "The Things We Do for Love." And it says, when we question racial inequality, our families and communities respond with fear in their faces, anger in their eyes, and disappointment in us. They want us to follow in their footsteps, and we want to continue to believe that they are people worth following. But what happens when we figure out where their path leads? And that was from a student.
Yes. The students are very crucial in this book. A lot of the student input.
But when you quoted that from that student in that book, what resonated with you?
That there's a fear of letting go and being let go of. There's a fear of rejection. There's a fear of what it's going to cost you. How serious is this? What will this really cost me if I'm a white person, we'll say. We'll talk about white people specifically right now. Go, gee, you know, if I really have a problem with this issue, and I'm really, really determined not to be fostering racial equality, to be exhibiting and demonstrating
and to
my
go
belief.
against my beliefs and what I'm taught through
That's
my
right.
family or through
That's
my
right. Or
ancestors,
through my church.
through my
Through my
church or
church.
community, so on and
Through,
so forth.
exactly. And is it okay to be omitting and delaying my response when issues of racism come up? TV is a fantastic forum for discussions on racism in any family because there's so many stereotypes on it.
Oh,
And there's
right.
so many-
Well, I think
so
we
you
had the
can-
conversation before. My whole pet peeve is the images of specifically black men.
Yes. Yes.
In the media,
Yes.
especially news and mainstream media in general, but
Yes.
specifically the news.
Yes. And one of the things that I mentioned in the book is that when you start to approach the book, there's two things you need to bring to the book, and that is humility and a suspension of judgment. Because it's a sad book. It's sad. And it illustrates the sadness of this problem in our culture. And it does connect it to violence. So it's not just an accident. It's not just that so-and-so hates so-and-so and that's irrelevant to me. That's okay. They have a right to their own opinion. No, 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 no. White privilege. We have white privilege. We still have white privilege. So as long as white privilege remains intact, we have a problem. As long as white privilege remains intact, there are things to do to change policies.
Absolutely.
And that really is our responsibility. It's no one else's responsibility. It is our responsibility. It's within our power to do that. We're the only ones who have that power to do that.
Absolutely.
We have to unravel our inheritance. We
That's
do
right.
have to. And so a lot of the students were really fearful of that. They were fearful of holding family members accountable for their racism.
Yeah, and I would imagine that could be tough to a large degree, too,
Sure.
especially, you know,
Sure.
I mean, again, just thinking of students and folks in that particular age group or whatever
Sure,
who
sure.
may really want to authentically, you know, foster some change.
Exactly.
However, if family is resistant or it's in that
Or
aspect,
intolerant.
or intolerant, absolutely.
If there are
That can be
conditions
tough.
attached to your point of view, which happens a lot,
Absolutely.
then it's true, then you're in another zone altogether. But you develop a racial equality muscle. That's what I refer to it in the book. So you develop the skills. Of course you're reticent. Of course you're frightened. Of course. This racism is affecting people in horrifying ways, and it's been doing that for centuries. Why shouldn't you be frightened? Why shouldn't it be scary? Why shouldn't it be somewhat humiliating? Or at least something where you're going to have to double check your motivation at the door
Right.
when you're doing certain things or saying certain things or hearing certain things.
Right.
But then it just depends on a lot of the students that I had, and in school I noticed a lot of white people are very scared and very afraid. They're very ashamed, scared,
Right.
guilty, and afraid. And that's really what I address in the book. I address, oh man, but you're only 18 or 19 or 20, or you may be 30 or 40 or 50.
Right.
Do you want to take that with you?
Exactly.
You don't need to take that with you.
Right.
Here's a way in which, here are some steps you can take so that you don't need to take that with you.
Absolutely. And I get the feeling that
Yes.
even though, and you define it as sort of a sad, humiliating book, but I can also see where it could be liberating as
Yes,
well
it
for
is.
folks who actually do.
Oh, it is. And all the students have, their students' quotes are all in there referring to that. We have
Thus
a
the
chapter
reviews.
called Validating Your
Absolutely,
Efforts.
yes.
It also discusses what freedom awaits you. That's another chapter, what freedom awaits you. Because
Exactly.
no, it's not. Some of the first steps of any change, any opportunity to exhibit any kind of courage requires some kind of change within you to own up to what you want to do and how you want to do it or what you think or care about most. And then you can, you start to assert yourself and you work your way through and you come out of the white box. I consider it a white box that you're in. You come out of the white box. We're in a constant process of coming out, all of us, for all of our lives. That's what the maturation process
Absolutely.
does for us, and that's what we bring to it. And so you simply start developing skills. And also there's a great deal of restoration and repairing and mending in relationships. You can be a messenger within your family. You can be
That's
a messenger
right.
within your community,
That's right.
within your church, within your
Absolutely.
school. And that is what you're going to be. And the more integrated you are psychically, and the more integrated you are as a human
You
being.
become the vehicle for change.
Of course, absolutely. And it's beautiful.
And it is
it's
a
very
beautiful
beautiful.
thing.
And there are
Right.
absolutely beautiful moments
Yeah.
as the students have shared about their process,
That's great.
their awareness, and people writing me about it all over the country.
I can imagine.
How
Yeah.
meaningful it's been for them and how healing it is. It's really a book of healing. Racism is a wound in this country. It's a
Right.
wound.
It is a
It's an
wound.
open wound.
Right.
And this book is about healing.
And we need to start wrapping up. But I want to ask you if you could just say real quick, what do you want people to take away from this book? Like if there's one.
Hope.
Hope. There you go. I like that.
Hope.
Yes, hope. Great. So first of all, I want to thank you. I think this is, it's been a wonderful conversation
Thank you.
here.
Thank you.
But I think we only like tipped the iceberg of
That's right.
not only what you addressed in the book here, but just this conversation
Yes.
in general. And I'd like to
Yes.
just extend an invitation to come back, and maybe we can do something on a consistent basis.
Definitely, absolutely.
Around this conversation,
Yes, I'd love to.
and maybe we can help foster some change as well.
Wonderful.
I also want to let the folks out there know that if you want this book here, Kayla has suggested giving away one of her books signed by her to the first person who emails me for the book. So first of all, why don't you give them your website so
Great.
that if they want more information about the book.
It is www.ltar.biz, L as in Larry, TAR.biz. And you, as I said, you can get the book really almost anywhere. You can also
Absolutely.
call 413-341-3503 if you are interested in speaking engagements and whatever else, whatever.
That's right.
There's a huge, broad range of interests
Exactly.
in this work.
That's
So
right.
whatever,
and you're a busy person, so if
whatever's
you
on your
really
agenda.
want her, you got to get in touch with her because
Thank
if
you.
you see her website and some of the things she's involved in and going to be speaking at over the next several months, she's going to be. And then if you want this book here, just email me at spotlightingparadise@gmail.com. That's where you can also send your comments regarding today's show or any other past shows. You always feel welcome to contact Northampton Community TV at northamptoncommunitytv.org. As always, I want to thank the folks here at Northampton Community TV, the staff, and the interns who worked on this show with us. They helped make this happen. We appreciate it. Thank you again, Kayla.
Thanks very much.
I'll leave you with this. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. Until next time on Spotlighting Paradise, peace and blessings, and keep the faith.